Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for this afternoon. And Dr. Tallamy is a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware, where he has authored 80 research articles and has taught for 33 years. Both of his books are available in the, I don't want to say atrium, but it really isn't an atrium, foyer. And I'm very excited about them. I've got one on my chair that I'm taking home. Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens was awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. The Living Landscape, co-authored with Rick Dark, was published this year, which hopefully, as I said, is available in the lobby. Among his awards are the Garden Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award for Excellence. Doug graced our fine city earlier this year when Trees Forever had their kickoff celebration in February, and it was very, very well received. So I would like you to welcome Doug, and hopefully, and I know we will all be very attentive, and we'll have a lot to learn. So thank you, and Doug, there you go.
You don't have to be attentive. You can eat. Eating's very important. I know you don't care, but I couldn't write a poem if I won the lottery. You told me I'd win the lottery if I couldn't do it. So I really appreciate that talent. It comes from I don't know where. All right, let's start. We have a lot to talk about in a very short period of time. I titled this "Why We Need Life Where We Live," because that's as good a title as any, and it ought to become obvious as we go through here. But first, let's start with this bird. What is this bird? Anybody recognize it? Resplendent quetzal. Yes, it's an endangered species from the forests of Central America. It's endangered. Well, it's a beautiful bird. They used to shoot it for its feathers. But it's endangered largely because it has a very specialized diet. It eats, for the most part, fruits of the wild avocado tree. If you don't have fruits of the wild avocado tree, you don't have quetzal populations. And unfortunately, we have cut down most of the wild avocado trees. So we have figured out that if you want quetzals, and we do, we're planting young wild avocado trees. And fortunately, they grow pretty quickly. They reach the stage where they start fruiting in not too many years. And the conservation status of the quetzal is starting to look a little bit better. But that conservation scenario is repeated time and time again. In the tropics, if you want to save the great green macaw, you have to have mountain almond trees, because that's the only tree they will nest in. And unfortunately, mountain almond trees take 150 years before they reach the stage where the birds will use them. And there are not very many birds left at this point. So if you want to save jaguars, you also need trees. You need a particular type of palm tree, because it makes a particular type of palm nut, and that happens to be the favorite food of peccaries. And that is what jaguars eat. So the point here is that specialization, particularly focusing on food resources, is the rule in the natural world. It is not the exception, and it always starts with plants, and in many cases, trees. Now, most people think that just about all the specialization in the world occurs in the tropics, and that's because so much of it does occur in the tropics. But it occurs right here in the temperate zone as well, and some of the most specialized relationships anywhere on the planet occur right in our yards. This is one of them. This is the bola spider. It's a female hanging from a river birch leaf in my yard. She's called the bola spider for obvious reasons. She drops a single strand of silk, puts a little sticky glob of glue on there, and it looks like a bolus. Now, she doesn't swing it around like this, but she does go fishing with it. She lowers it, and she raises it, and lowers it. And the first time I watched her do this, I told her, "You are not going to catch anything." But can you imagine something flying into that by accident? Well, about 15 seconds later, a moth flew into that, got stuck, she reeled it in, laid her eggs on it. But it wasn't an accident. That female spider was releasing the sex pheromone of that particular species of moth. She had mimicked the sex pheromone. And each species of boa spider mimics the sex pheromone of one species of moth. So you can have boa spiders in your yard if you have the host plant that supports the larval development of that species of moth. This is Phlox cavaricata, very popular spring ephemeral, at least in the East. And it spreads readily from seed in your garden if it is pollinated. But if you look at the entrance to the corolla there, it's very narrow. I have watched bees, native bees, land on this flower and try to get their tongues into it, and they can't do it. It's too small. So who is pollinating our phlox? Well, it turns out it's day-flying sphinx moths. This is the snowberry clearwing. That is its tongue right there. It sinks it deep into the flower, and then pulls it out, covered with lots of pollen, and goes to the next one. So again, you can have your phlox pollinate. If you have day-flying sphinx moths, you can have the snowberry clearwing if you have snowberry clearwing larvae, and you can have snowberry clearwing larvae if you have what they eat, which is coral honeysuckle. Specialization, getting back to plants. There's a lot of specialization focused on crypsis, the ability to hide among the plants that you're actually eating. So everybody see the caterpillar there? Right here. There it is, a little bit more obvious. This is the cloudless sulfur on partridge pea. It's very obvious that if it's not on partridge pea, it's going to be eaten very quickly. And even animals we don't think of as having specialized relationship with plants actually do. I'm going to use the Carolina chickadee as an example. There are many examples, but this is a good one. Now, most people think of chickadees as seed eaters, because they are seed eaters all winter long. There's a chickadee on my feeder at home right now, I'm sure. But in the springtime, when they are reproducing, they are not seed eaters. They become caterpillar specialists. As it turns out that chickadees only feed their young caterpillars, which means if you are in a habitat that doesn't have enough caterpillars, you're not going to have chickadees. Almost enough caterpillars isn't good enough. You have to have enough. So that's the next question. What is enough? How many caterpillars does it take to make one clutch of chickadees? It takes a lot. It was actually these birds that told me that. They built a nest in my backyard, and I set up my camera to see what they were bringing back. And the first thing I learned is that that's what they were bringing back, caterpillars. The male and the female cooperate, so they're foraging at the same time, and they can bring a caterpillar back to the nest once every 3 minutes. In one 27-minute period, they brought back 30 caterpillars. So how do they do that? By bringing back more than one at a time? Sometimes a whole bunch. And they're doing this all day long, 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now, sometimes they bring back an adult caterpillar, a moth, but that's unusual. It's usually the caterpillar itself. Okay, another important part of this story is how many species of caterpillars do they bring back? Well, in a 3-hour period, they brought back 17 species. And they're only foraging about 50 meters from the nest. They're not flying 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot. So if you don't have all these species that close to the nest, it's not going to work out. Why do we need a lot of species? Well, if I had 1 or 2 species in my yard, and they didn't happen to be common that year, there would not be enough caterpillars to bring these guys through to maturity. So this is where diversity builds stability into our ecosystems. We have a diversity of caterpillars in our yard. Many more than 17, many more than 34, probably 134 at least are around during that the breeding period of this chickadee. And that stabilizes the food web. There will always be some combination of species that are common enough so that the chickadees can reproduce every single year. Now, if we go to the book and we look it up, we see that chickadees bring back between 390 and 570 caterpillars to the nest every day. And they're doing that on average for 16 days. So if we get out our calculators, that's between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch of chickadees. And chickadees are tiny birds, a third of an ounce. I think that's 4 pennies. How many caterpillars does it take to make a red-bellied woodpecker? It's 8 times bigger than a chickadee. I don't know, but it's a lot. And of course, we don't want just chickadees and red-bellied woodpeckers. We want titmice, and we want blue jays, and we want yellowthroats, and we certainly want our bluebirds. We want indigo buntings and prairie warblers and hummingbirds. We want a whole diversity, a whole community of birds. And they're all eating insects. By the way, what is the specialized relationship with hummingbirds? Nectar? Nectar? No. Well, it kind of is. I mean, we all know you put out your hummingbird feeder and they come. But 80% of a hummingbird's diet is insects and spiders. And of course, spiders needed insects to become spiders. You don't have hummingbirds if you don't have the insects. You can put out all the nectar you want. And that is true for 96% of the birds in North America, the terrestrial birds. This is a list of all the bird families that rear their young on insects. Or the book will say other arthropods. And again, those other arthropods typically are spiders that needed insects to become spiders. And this is news to a lot of people. Most people think that birds need seeds and berries. And if I pick up any how to landscape for birds book, that's what they'll tell me to plant. And many of them do need seeds and berries, particularly the ones that stick around for the winter. But we need to put the plants in our yards that make the insects that make more birds, or we're not going to have the birds. So I love to generalize. There's a good one. No insects, no baby birds. All right, what types of landscapes are capable of making the abundance and diversity of insects that we need to support not just bird food webs, but many other types of food webs? And to answer that question, we have to consider the most common type of specialized relationship that we have all over the planet. And that's the relationship between the insects that eat plants, not pollinators, but the insects that eat plants and the plants themselves. You have to remember that plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they have loaded their tissues with nasty-tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make their tissues either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense. It keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why when we look out in the summertime, it's green. It's not because there's no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of those leaves are unavailable. They are too well protected from the things that want to eat them. But we do know that insects eat plants. So how do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, they specialize. About 90% of the insects that eat plants are highly specialized on only one or maybe two plant lineages that share a common chemical defense. And in order to get around that defense, they develop specialized adaptations, the physiological adaptations, the enzymes, and the mechanisms to store and excrete those toxins, behavioral adaptations that allow them to avoid the toxins, life history adaptations that also allow them to avoid those toxins. But it takes a long period of evolutionary exposure to those particular plant lineages for all of these adaptations to fall into place. It does not happen overnight. I'm going to use eastern red cedar as an example. This is a plant that has been very successful. It has been around for a long, long time. Excuse me, that's what happens when you eat lunch first. It's a conifer, so it's been around millions of years, interacting with local insects for millions of years, and yet there are still very few insects that have been able to adapt to eastern red cedar. Why? Because it uses a toxic monoterpene as its defense called beta-thuyoplixin, and that's really effective. But this is one that has adapted. This is the juniper hairstreak. It's a specialist on eastern red cedar. It has the adaptations that allow it to eat beta-thuyoplixin without dying. And that's the upside of specialization. The downside of specialization is that now that's all it can eat. So by specializing on one plant lineage, it did not specialize on another one. So it doesn't have the adaptations to eat oaks or grasses or lilacs or anything else. Which means if we don't landscape in a way that includes eastern red cedar, we're not going to have this butterfly in our landscapes. It's that simple. That's what the larva looks like. A good example of crypsis. Very hard to find these things on eastern red cedar. But if you're going to eat eastern red cedar, you might as well look like it. So you can hide from all those birds. Does everybody see the caterpillar here? Right there. There it is up close. That's the curved line angle. There's one right in here. I showed this picture to my wife. I said, "Can you see the caterpillar?" And she said, "Of course." I said, "Yeah, that one's pretty obvious. For one reason, the red head is supposed to be against a red stem over here, and he's backwards." She said, "Oh, I didn't see that one. I saw this one that I hadn't seen when I took the picture." You can also blend in with red cedar by looking like the dead parts, the dead fronds. This is the juniper geometer that is fairly common on red cedars. So that's another advantage of specializing. You can blend in with what you're specializing on. But specialization has become a curse in today's landscapes because we humans haven't thought about that. And we're taking away all these plants that the insects are specialized on. And nothing is a better example of that than our poor friend, the monarch. Everybody loves monarch. It's probably the most iconic insect in the world. But there's only, at least as of last winter, there were only 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to what was there in 1976. So we've lost 96% of our monarchs. Why? Largely because we've adopted clean farming techniques that have eliminated many of the milkweeds that these monarchs depended on. So it's Roundup Ready corn and soybeans that get rid of the weeds in the fields, and I think that's fair enough. But they also get rid of the weeds outside of the fields if it's sprayed outside, and that's apparently what we're doing. There are now 82% fewer milkweeds in Iowa than there were just 10 years ago. So it's no surprise why the monarchs are disappearing. But this spring, in early June, I was looking at this Asclepias tuberosa butterfly weed. Notice how we call our native plants weeds? We call Ailanthus tree of heaven. And there was a monarch. Now that tied all the monarchs I saw the previous summer. I saw one all summer long. But here in June, I saw one already. I watched that plant another 10 minutes, and I saw two more monarchs. So 3 in the space of 15 minutes looking at this one plant. Do you know where I was? I was on that high line we were talking about earlier today. And there's that plant, and there's the nature. That's all it took to support those monarchs that were either flying by, they were going to reproduce on that, which tells me that the future of the monarch is probably not going to be in agriculture. It's going to be where we live, if we put those milkweeds in. It's not just caterpillars that are specialists. This is the elderberry beetle that only eats elderberry. The dogbane beetle only eats dogbane. Sumac flea beetle only eats sumac. This is a leaf-footed bug, Korean bug, that only eats ash. So if the emerald ash borer takes out all of our ashes, we will lose this species. David Wagner at the University of Connecticut has just finished a paper looking at the species that would disappear from if we lost our ashes, and he's up to about 95 now that would disappear. And again, it gets back to that 90% figure. 90% of those insects that eat plants depend on particular plant lineages. If we lose them, we'll lose 90% of our insects. But the good news is we can use this knowledge of specialization to rebuild food webs. So when we're creating all these spaces that bring so many things to humans, at the same time, if we use the right plants, we can create spaces that recreate the complexity of the biodiversity that not only we enjoy, but we actually need. So how are we going to do that? Let's use the white-eyed vireo as an example. I'm using it as an example because that's the nest that my wife found in our yard. And again, set up my camera so I could see what they're bringing back and feeding these babies. And then we can work backwards. If I know what the insect is, I can figure out what it was eating and what plant I would need to support white-eyed vireo food webs. So let's do that. This is the blinded sphinx moth, and it's a specialist on black cherry. We do have lots of black cherries, so these babies got to eat. This is the chestnut schizura, a specialist on viburnum, particularly viburnum dentatum. I don't know why it's called the chestnut schizura, but it eats viburnum. We do have viburnum because we planted it there. Our house was mowed for hay before we moved in. There wasn't anything there. So we put the viburnum in and they get to eat again. This is the drab prominent, a specialist on sycamore. We have sycamore because a sycamore seed blew in from someplace into my cold frame. And I'm slow at weeding things out. It's now 30 feet tall. And it's making drab prominents that are feeding these babies. This is the 8-spotted forester moth, a specialist on native grapes. We have them. This is the lunate zale, another specialist on black cherry. This is the spicebush swallowtail. There's this little eye that's supposed to scare the bird into thinking it's a tree snake. It didn't work. It's a specialist on spicebush and also sassafras, which is a close relative. And we have both of those plants. That's the tufted bird-dropping moth, another specialist on black cherry. So black cherry is becoming very important in this particular food web. But of course, these guys are hungry. They need a lot more than that. So let's put some black walnut into the landscape. We can have the walnut sphinx, or the gray-edged bomoloca, or the black blotch caesura, or the bride. These are all specialists on black walnut. Native maples will give us Plagodes inchworms, the green striped maple worm, the retarded dagger moth. Native elms, this is the American elm, will give us the four-horned sphinx, the double-toothed prominent. If you have witch hazel, you can have the mustard sallow. If you have violets, everybody's got violets, but you have to leave them in your lawn. They come up in your lawn in the spring, and what do? We mow them down. Well, that is the only host plant for our true fritillaries. and fritillars overwinter as larvae. So when you mow them down in the spring, you have just wiped out your population of fritillars. So remember, 90% of the insects that are eating plants are only going to be around if we include the plants with which they have co-evolved. So if we want the hackberry emperor, we need hackberry. If we want Coeculeo asteroides, we need native asters. If we want the brown-hooded owlet, we need goldenrod. If we want the hog sphinx or the Pandora sphinx or the abbot sphinx, we need Virginia creeper. Whether or not you like it, it's a very powerful plant. If you want the river birch dagger moth, you need river birch. If you want the red bud leaf roller, you need red bud. Or the large pectes requires sweet gum. The gray furcula requires native willows. The turbulent phosphilla, and you can't tell which end is which there. That needs greenbrier. And of course the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oakworm, the epilated dagger moth, the pink-striped dagger moth, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the streaked dagger moth, or the laugher, and many, many more all require oaks. Why do we need all these insects? It's not just birds that need these insects. Almost everything else is depending on them as well. As I've said 3 times so far, spiders eat insects. We would lose our spiders. And I know a lot of people don't like spiders, but look who does. It's the second most important part of our bird food webs. We can't afford to lose our spiders. We would lose the insect predators that eat those insect herbivores. And they themselves are part of food webs. We would lose our frogs, our toads, all of our amphibians, because they all eat insects. We'd lose our lizards, we'd lose our bats. We'd even take a huge hit on our rodents, because rodents will take an insect over seed anytime. Why? Because it's great food. Pound for pound, there's twice as much protein in insect meat as there is in beef, and insects have organs in their abdomen called fat bodies that are loaded with lipids, high energy compounds that allow these guys to grow quickly and reproduce quickly. And if you're a mouse, that's what you want to do, because there's so many things that want to eat you. But it's the same reason larger organisms are eating insects. The skunk is digging up your yard to get the grubs that are in your yard. Possums eat a lot of insects. Raccoons eat a lot of insects. And even things we don't think of as insectivores eat a lot of insects. Like our friend, the red fox. 25% red fox diet is insects. 23% of a black bear's diet. Almost a quarter of it doesn't matter how big you are, you need insects. And even things that don't eat insects need insects. This is the sharp-shinned hawk. It's a bird predator. But the birds it's eating needed insects to become birds. The garter snake doesn't eat insects directly, but it eats the frogs and toads that needed the insects. So you get it. A world without insects is a world without biological diversity. And E.O. Wilson told us way back in, 1979, that a world without biological diversity is a world without humans. So this is where even people who don't care about this stuff, they need to know this. This is very important. So what's happening to all those things that rely on insects? Let's just talk about birds, because people care about birds. This is the State of the Birds report, September 2014. 230 species of North American birds headed downhill rapidly. Not one, not two, not just the condor or the whooping crane, 230. We now have 50% fewer birds of all kinds today than we had just 40 years ago. Birds are ecological indicators. If they're declining, there's something wrong with their ecosystems. And those are the same ecosystems that are supporting us. Again, we need to listen. There is good news. There is good news, though. We are in control of what is in our landscapes. Let's just talk about where we live. What's in our yards? We're in control. I did a little 12 by 12 experiment this summer. That's what 12 feet by 12 feet looks like if you rope it off. You get to decide what's going to grow there. You really can. It's not your neighbor who decides that. So, are you going to have grass? You could. Not much biodiversity in grass, but you could have it. Or you could put an oak tree in there. Now, this one's 14 years old. I planted from an acorn, and it's about 12 feet by 12 feet in dimension, width-wise anyway. And what I did was walk around the circumference of that tree and count all the caterpillars that I found. This is on July 25th of this summer. That's a white oak. I found 410 caterpillars from 19 different species on that white oak. And look, there's the white oak. The day I did that count, it's not defoliated. As a matter of fact, you can't see any of those caterpillars. So don't worry about it. How about a black cherry? Let's walk around a black cherry that's about 12 by 12. I got 239 caterpillars from 14 different species, so not quite as productive, but still pretty good. Now let's go to my neighbor's house and walk around a Bradford pear. Calorie pear. Okay, I did find a caterpillar. I found 1 inchworm from 1 species. So you will hear, these plants support insects, and that's true, but the amount and the diversity is not near what my friend the chickadees or anybody else needs. How about burning bush? I did that also at my neighbor's house, and this time found 4 leaf skeletonizers, too small for anything to eat, from 1 species. Now what if that was a fluke? What if I just happened to pick really productive white oaks and black cherries? Oh, I took it out. Well, I did it again. You get the same results. I could do it 1,000 times, and that's the pattern. These plants are very poor at supporting the caterpillars that support our food webs. So let's give you some examples here. There really are huge differences. Oaks are number 1 when you rank them in terms of their ability to make caterpillars. We've done this in the Mid-Atlantic states. We're working on a list for Iowa right now. Actually, I think my technician's on vacation, but she would be working on it. And it should be ready around April 1st. But 557 species of caterpillars. And again, if you don't like caterpillars, it's 557 species of bird food produced by oaks. Let's compare that to ginkgos. Now, this is the favorite tree in our city plannings. Why? Because it's from China. That's why. Is that a good reason? It supports, there are 4 species recorded on there, and I bet every one of them is a mistaken record. One of those is supposed to be the cecropia moth. I'll give you $10,000 for every cecropia moth you bring me from a ginkgo. What happens is they eat something, then they crawl off, and they pupate or spin their cocoon on something else. I bet you somebody found a cecropia cocoon and wrote it down. But even if those are 4 good records, look, you never find any feeding damage on ginkgo. It's essentially like a silk tree or plastic. It's there, but it's not contributing. Number 2 on the list is our native prunus, the black cherry, the pin cherry, the American plum, Chickasaw plum. 456 species recorded on native prunus, compared to Zelkova, another favorite tree from landscape tree from China. Because it looks kind of like the elms we've lost to Dutch elm disease, nothing even, zero records on Zelkova. How about Pieris japonica, probably the most common foundation plant that we have. 2 species recorded on that. I've never found them. Compared to one of our native viburnums, support 103 species. So the plants that we are landscaping with typically are usually very poor at supporting the insects that we need them to support. Because, of course, these plants did not co-evolve with those insects. They haven't developed those specialized relationships. And the bird, yeah, we are not fooling the birds. It doesn't matter what we put in our yard. They're only going to go to the plants that make the food for them. So here's a little bit of data from my graduate student, Desiree Naranjo, who's studying 90 chickadee pairs in Washington, D.C. area. The star is where the nest is. The blue line is the range of their foraging activities. And the blue areas, the dark blue areas and the lighter blue areas are where they spend 95% of their time foraging. So the darker the area, the more time they spend there. So what are those plants they're foraging on? Well, basswood, sweet gum, pin oaks, black cherry, willow oaks, American elm, that's where they spent the most of the time, was on the elm. All native plants. Equally instructive is what they were not going to, which were all the non-native plants in that area. The Leyland cypress, the magnolias, and the Japanese maples, and the ginkgo right there. So, why? Because would you go to ShopRite and shop time and time again if there was nothing on the shelves? Probably not. And either will the chickadee. And it's easy to envision a neighborhood that is largely or entirely non-native trees like this. So the trees we put into our landscapes matter to the things that need the food that they're using. How about berries? Another set of specialized relationships that we need to talk about. We hear all the time that many of our non-native plants make berries, and the birds eat them, and so therefore they're good for the birds. We have used it as an excuse to plant things like autumn olive and bush honeysuckle and so on over the years. So is that true? Are all berries good for the birds? Well, that's elderberry. It's one of the great summer berries. These are they're actually little cones on our eastern red cedar, but they're very popular with the birds. Poison ivy berries. Nobody likes poison ivy, but boy, the berries in the fall are essential for fall migrants. Why? Because birds have co-evolved with plants for seed dispersal in the same way that insects have co-evolved with plants. The plants in this case are manipulating the birds. They want the birds to carry the seeds away. So in the summer they make berries that are high in sugar because that's what the birds need after they fledge. They want to eat really sugary things and grow quickly. In the fall though, they're migrating and they need a lot of energy. So they need berries that are high in fat. The plants know that, so they make berries that are high in fat and service all of those migrants. And then late in winter, they should switch back to high sugar berries, but those are berries that only develop a palatable taste after several hard freezes. So the plants are doing what the birds need when they need to do it. How about the berries from our invasive plants? Like this is autumn olive, and you know what they are. Well, it turns out that they are asynchronized with the needs of our birds. In the fall, these guys are all making berries, and look, they're all high sugar berries, very low in fat. Whereas in the fall, these are just some of the ones that have been analyzed by Susan Smith. 50% of Myrica pennsylvanica is fat. Viburnum dentatum, almost 50%. Lindera, almost 50%. Parthenocissus is very high up there. So huge differences in the fat content of fall berries. These guys are also producing berries in the fall. And it could be, when all the data are in, that most of or all of our non-native berry producers are phenologically out of sync with the birds. So even though they're making lots of berries, and even though the birds eat them, we eat things we shouldn't eat too. And it's for the same reason. It's filled with sugar, but it doesn't give the migrating birds the energy that they need. So all the data so far say that these non-native berries are not good for the birds. So we can never use that as an excuse to plant them. How about buckthorn? That's Rhamnus cathartica. Those berries are designed to make the bird throw up. The bird eats it, 2 hours later it throws up, and it has moved the seed in the meantime, so it works for the plant. But the birds actually lose weight. I mean, this is terrible for birds. So, all right. Now, why do we need all this life around us? That comes back to our original question. We need life because it's the biodiversity around us that create those ecosystem services we were talking about this morning. That Millennial Ecosystem Assessment that Kathy talked about earlier came out in 2005. Their main objective was to measure the ability of the Earth to produce ecosystem services for humans, and their conclusion was that we have already degraded the planet's ability to do that by 60%. Not good news. Not good news, folks. That's the ocean, by the way. That's not a recycling plant. Why don't we let our natural areas make all these ecosystem services that we need? Well, quite simply, we don't have enough natural areas left anymore. We're everywhere, and we know that. There's no place you can go where you don't have a whole bunch of humans. And most of the places that are really lit up like that, we have transformed the landscape. We have taken away the native plant communities that are supporting the life that are running our ecosystems and replaced them with a hodgepodge of other things that we now call novel ecosystems. Novel ecosystems don't have the specialized relationships in them that are required to run our... they're the specialized relationships that are nature. So what are we going to do? We've turned the landscape into this. We've usurped so much of that natural world that we now have to think about how we're going to redesign this so that it will produce the ecosystem services that support us and everything else, by the way. It's not just humans that need ecosystem services. Everybody needs oxygen. Everybody needs clean water. Everybody needs stable climate. So how are we going to do that? I want to raise the bar about what we're asking from our landscapes. Now, we talked a lot this morning about doing that in terms of creating things that are healthy for humans. That is great. But I want our landscapes to support all of life. In the past, we've asked one thing of our landscapes, and that is to be pretty. That's it. If you're pretty, it's great. So we can still ask our landscapes to be pretty, but are they going to support life? Do they sequester carbon? We do want them to sequester carbon. Are they supporting pollinators? 90% of our angiosperms, 80% of all plants are pollinated by animals. If we lose those animals, we'll lose 80 to 90% of our plants. Not an option, folks. You always hear we need pollinators because they pollinate our crops. They do, but they pollinate all the plants that are out there. We can't lose all the plants. We want them to manage our water. You can come up a whole list of things you want your landscape to accomplish. So this is what the landscapes look like around where I live. And they have accomplished the perfect lawn. They've done that. But there's a family that lives in this house, and if they're not generating all the ecosystem services they need on that property, they're going to have to borrow them from someplace else. I'm not going to borrow them from their neighbor, because he's not generating any. They're probably not going to borrow them from the open spaces in their communities, because if it's like the open spaces in my community, it's typically bare lawn of one function or another, the athletic field, or just the place you walk around in a paved path. We think if there's no building on it, it's good land stewardship. But not really. It's not going to generate ecosystem services. So let's say we want to encourage water infiltration. We want to make clean water. This landscape's not going to do it. It's not going to do it because lawn makes dirty water. We put fertilizer and pesticides on that lawn. Then it rains and it all washes into our watersheds. And in the summer it gets sunbaked and really prevents infiltration to recharge our water tables. So we want to reduce the area that's in lawn. If we want to sequester carbon, and we do want to sequester carbon, we don't want just 10% of the tree biomass on our properties that could be there. We've measured that back east, and that's what it is, 10% compared to local woodlots. So we're not going to have 100% of what we used to have, but we can do better than 10%. And we don't want short-lived ornamental trees like Bradford pear here, because they live about 30 years, then they fall over in the ice storm and release all the carbon that they just sequestered. We need long-term carbon sequestration. Those big oaks, they're like the beautiful trees that we do have around here. And of course, our pollinators. We've got to support our pollinators for the reasons I have already talked about. This is a landscape that does not support pollinators. It's not sequestering carbon. It's not helping water infiltration. It's not doing much. Yet this is what people prefer. And if we want to support food webs, again, this is not how to do it. This is my neighbor's house. He has 10 acres. 100% of the plants he's put on the 10 acres are out-of-towners. They're from someplace else. So how have we gotten here? We've gotten here because we've come to see plants just as decorations. Why? Because they're beautiful. So that has created the entire horticultural industry. We've gone all over the world to look for the prettiest plants, and that is the #1 criterion that we think of when we're putting plants in our landscape. Maybe they can be screens or anchors or focal points, but it's all about aesthetics. We have not considered any of their ecological roles. And so now we're starting to do that. So if we do consider those ecological roles, we can balance this ecological seesaw here. Do they have food web value? If they don't, you don't have any of the living things in your yard. And that's not the way to support ecosystem function. Are they supporting pollinators? Are they sequestering carbon, doing all these things, and many, many more? We can do both. We can have pretty landscapes that are functional. And that's definitely the way we have to go. So what does a biodiversity-friendly suburb look like? This is the most important thing we need to do. We need to build biological corridors that connect the isolated habitat fragments that we have out there. There are fragments, but they are isolated and they're too small. If we connect those fragments, the populations within the fragments will not be tiny anymore because now they're all connected. And when they fluctuate, and all populations do fluctuate, they won't disappear the way they are disappearing now because they're larger populations. And that alone is predicted to stop the loss of species from your local ecosystems. Where are we going to put these biological corridors? I suggest we put them in the area that's now in lawn. We have 45.6 million acres of lawn. That's 8 times the size of New Jersey. I don't know how big Iowa is, but it's a lot of lawn. We are adding 500 square miles of lawn to the U.S. every year. Why? Because lawn's a status symbol. We were told in the 50s that if we didn't have a perfect lawn, we were communist. And we believed it. And now Scott's Turf Builder tells us you got to have a perfect lawn or you're just a plain bad person. So it's a status symbol, but you know what? We can change our status symbols. We can. I went to where'd I go? Wyoming, Montana, someplace this last year, and I noticed they did not have big lawns. I said, "Where are your big lawns?" And they said, "Well, we only get 9 inches of rain a year." But they said, "It's not our status symbol." I said, "Oh, well, what is your status symbol?" The guy thought, and he said, "Well, big belt buckles." So there's the answer. If we double the size of our belt buckles and cut the size of lawn in half, then we're there. And of course, we want to build these carders out of the plants that are going to support the biodiversity that we're talking about. This is what we used to do. We built our house, put in a flower bed right next to the house, and put in a few trees. Then we were exhausted. No more landscaping. So everything by default became lawn. Let's turn that on its head. Let's build the house, and now figure out where we do want lawn. We want lawn where we're going to walk. It's the perfect plant to walk on without killing it. So figure out where you're going to walk, where you're going to let grass guide you through your landscape so you can actually interact with it. Get all those health benefits we were talking about. I look at where my neighbors walk on their 10 acres of lawn. Nowhere. They're never outside. But let's say you want to get married in the front yard. You need lawn there. If you want to walk to the backyard, nice grass path, throw the frisbee, have a barbecue, whatever you want to do, that's where the lawn goes. Then everything else by default becomes heavily planted. And you have to do it in a biome appropriate manner. So if you're in a prairie ecosystem, you're not going to put an eastern deciduous forest in. So it's going to depend on where you are around the country. But if you convince your neighbors to do the same thing, then you have that connectivity that I'm talking about, that connects with the woodlot over here and the woodlot over here. And you really have stopped the drain of species for your ecosystem. As a matter of fact, you can actually build species. And I can tell you that works because that's what we've done at home. We took our 10 acres that were mowed for hay. We now have 54 species of breeding birds on that 10 acres. And who knows how many things supporting those breeding birds. But look, we still have lawn. We can play with our lawnmowers. It will be okay. If we take half of the area that's now in lawn, let's say we've got 40 million acres. We'll make the math simple and take it out of lawn. Put it in these carders. We can create a new national park that will be 20 million acres in size. We're going to do it at home, so we'll call it Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, plus Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, the Badlands, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, and Grand Canyon, Denali, which is huge. The Great Smoky Mountains, we add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So we're going to create the biggest national park in the U.S. Let's take areas that look like this and turn them into that. Notice we're not moving out. We're simply sharing our landscapes now. We're going to give up the notion that humans are here and nature's someplace else. Now we're all going to be in the same place. We're going to take away our little square bushes here and put some trees in the yard. This would be a very productive place to live. Really, there's the house right there. It's a high-end house. Or maybe you can find an area where you get rid of all the lawn. Really very productive there. Now this is a mulch sculpture that I guess it's an attempt at formal landscaping. And you will hear you can't use native plants in a formal landscape unless you are in a park in Indianapolis where those are all native plants. It's a formal planting. That's 1 year. They planted those last spring, and that's what it looked like this summer. So that's nonsense. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants you put in that design. Now, this is a corporate landscape that invites the employees out at noon to get sunburn. It could be a lovely pond like this. And we talked about this research. 15 minutes is all it takes to lower your blood pressure in a setting like this. So, my goodness, let's do that. And if we create landscapes like that, we introduce 3 things into those landscapes that probably weren't there before. Surprise, anticipation, and entertainment. By surprise, I mean you cannot walk into this landscape without seeing something you didn't expect to see. And to me, that's surprise, but it's also entertainment. Maybe you'll see this fun glass slug, which is my favorite caterpillar. And if you don't like it, you can at least appreciate it from me. Or the little puss caterpillar with a little top knot. I mean, how cute is that? Or the rosy maple moth, that's beautiful. Maybe you'll see this dead leaf up here, which is really that's a caterpillar right there. That's the showy emerald. Or maybe you'll see the fawn sphinx. I go to talk after talk, and people show beautiful plants. They say, this will knock your socks off. This will knock your socks off. That knocks my socks off. I've only seen 2 in my life. I saw that outside my bathroom window. It made my day, restored all my attention span. It was great for me. But you know what? Even if you don't like the fawn sphinx, look who does. Our birds love these sphinx moths, and we need to put them back on our landscapes. Maybe you'll see an interesting behavior, like the red-spotted purple female here who wants to lay an egg. She will land on a black cherry because that's where she's going to do it. She lands in the middle and then works her way down to the tip. Works her way down, touches her abdomen to the very tip of that branch, and leaves her beautiful little egg. And she'll do that right in front of your face as long as you're not waving your arms. These are things that are happening outside if you go outside and actually get connected to them. Maybe you'll see a Sphinxicampa caterpillar. I show this to adults and they say, "Ooh, is it going to sting me?" I show it to my granddaughter and she says, "Is it tickly?" It is not going to sting you, and it is tickly. Anticipation. Our seasons change at home based on when something happens in nature. We know it's springtime when the woodcock shows up. So we anticipate it. I come home from work, I say to Cindy, "Have you seen the woodcock? Have you heard the woodcock?" No. And then all of a sudden, "Yes, we heard it today." And you know what? That's a message of hope. It shows that nature is still working. No matter all the things we've done to it, it's still working. The woodcock still comes, and we get to change the calendar to springtime. We know it's midsummer when the white-lined sphinx pollinates the evening primrose. We know it's fall when the juncos show up. That's just our calendar. You can make your own. Entertainment. This is the bottlebrush buckeye. 2 summers ago, I walked by it, and 17 swallowtails flew up. You can't walk through a cloud of 17 swallowtails without a smile on your face. But does that mean your yard has to be 100% native? No, it doesn't. Just understand what each plant in your yard is doing and what it's not doing. And don't be fooled into thinking that all plants are doing the same things, because they're not. Let's use crepe myrtle as an example. You know, crepe myrtle is the only plant left in South Carolina at this point. Kidding. But there are zillions of them everywhere. Why? Because they're beautiful plants. They have beautiful blooms, they get nice exfoliating bark, and they are planted everywhere. But what are they contributing to food webs? 0. Nothing. So what's a beautiful thing that contributes nothing biologically? Well, I think it's a statue. The question is, how many statues do you want in your yard? 1 or 2 is appropriate, but if everything's a statue, it's too much. So why do we need more native plants in our gardens and our landscapes? These are reasons that have all been suggested. These 3 have been aimed at me. Some people say, well, we need to have native plants so we have a sense of place. And it kind of fits in with our theme today. But a sense of place really means that you understand the biome you're in, and you understand the plants that ought to be there, and you can appreciate that if you come to it, if you design your yard with all the appropriate plants. But you know what? The general public doesn't care about that. They don't. You can drive across the country, and we've done this, and go into any neighborhood, and you will find the same few species of Chinese plants. People are not after a sense of place, so I don't think we're going to convince people about that. How about because native plants are prettier? We have some gorgeous native plants, but we've got gorgeous non-native plants too, so we're not going to win that argument. Now, as I said, these were applied to me, that I like native plants because I'm nostalgic for the past. I just want things to be the way they were. You know, I did have a good time in high school, but that is not why I like native plants. It's because I oppose change. Don't I know that ecosystem change is normal? Yes, I do know that. Ecosystem change is normal, but the rate at which we are changing our ecosystems is not normal. We are changing them faster than the things in them can adapt to those changes, and that causes species loss. So I am all for normal ecosystem change. Abnormal ecosystem change, no, not for it. And it's not because I dislike foreigners. That's called nativism. That's not why I like native plants. I like native plants because we need ecosystem function. I find it very interesting, but even if I didn't, we would need it. Everybody on this planet has to be a steward of the functioning of that planet, or we're going to disappear. Those are our 2 options. So we need those specialized relationships that are nature. And we can save them. We can save them if we embrace them, share our landscapes with them, and recreate them. And I'm going to leave you with one example of how easy this can be. This is the Atala butterfly. And the homeowners of southern Florida have accidentally saved this species from extinction. It's a beautiful lycaenid. It's beautiful as an adult. It's beautiful as a larva. It's beautiful as a chrysalis. And like the other species I talked about today, it is a host plant specialist. In this case, an extreme specialist. Eats 1 species of plant, the kunti. It's a native cycad that also occurs in southern Florida. I should say it used to occur in southern Florida. It has a lot of starch in its roots, And the Seminole Indians discovered that and ate the roots as a source of starch. When the settlers came, they taught the settlers to do the same thing. The settlers ate the coonchie roots, but then they said, let's make a starch industry out of coonchie roots. In the 1912 census in Miami, 80% of the people put down their occupation as starch gatherers. And they did. They gathered all the starch. They gathered all the coonchie, extinct from the wild. There were a few plants in gardens. But if the coonchie disappears, then of course you have no plants for the Atala butterfly, and it disappears as well. When we had the Endangered Species Act come on board in 1973, there was a desperate attempt to find some Atalas somewhere so that they could get them listed as endangered, so they could get some conservation funds and help to save them. But they couldn't find any. So instead they got it listed as officially extinct. But then the landscaping industry discovered those few coonchie in gardens and said, hey, this is a good landscape plant. It's a low-growing evergreen shrub that does well in the sandy soils of South Florida. So they started to promote it. It's now pretty much everywhere down there. And guess what? The Atala showed up again. Nobody knows where it came from. There must have been a remnant population in the Everglades that is now colonizing these coonchie plantings. There's still no coonchie in the wild, but they don't care. They don't care. And that's what I love about this story, is that they saved this species from extinction accidentally. They never did get it listed as an endangered species, so they never got one dime of conservation money, which is good because we don't have one dime of conservation money. All they did was change the palette of what they plant in their gardens by one species. They added coonchie to it, and they were able to save this beautiful butterfly from extinction. So if you can do that by accident, think what we could do if we made conservation a goal, a conscious goal of our landscaping. Extremely powerful tool. And fortunately, it's going to work. If we start soon, it's going to work. Nature is really malleable. It's forgiving. It is not endlessly forgiving, but it's really forgiving. And it's going to give us one more chance. Thank you very much. Yeah.